This is Talk Business and Politics with Roby Brock.
I'm Roby Brock. Thanks for joining me. Tuesday was a historic night in Arkansas politics as Republicans swept to victory at nearly every level in the state. Senator-elect Tom Cotton, Governor-elect Asa Hutchinson, all of the federal offices, all of the constitutional offices, and supermajorities in the Arkansas legislature. To break it all down, I'm joined by KATV Scott Inman and Janelle Lilley. Thank you both for being here. We had a busy night on Tuesday night. Did we not?
Yes,
we did.
I would say it was long, but I think it was shorter than we were expecting going in, to be honest with you.
Yeah, I mean, look, they called the elections for governor and senate at like 7:31.
Yeah, 7:32. All of a sudden, I got the push alerts on my phone.
Yeah, you were there.
Yeah.
What was the reaction in the Cotton camp?
Shock. Everyone, and I kid you not, turned to me and was like, how do you know this? How are you guys pushing this? You know, how can this be? And I said, man, those exit polls must be dramatic if they're going to call it that early.
We were sitting here on the desk with our roundtable. We had Rex Nelson, Jason Tolbert, John Brummett, and myself, Scott, and we immediately knew that the exit polling had to be so wide of a margin that they could not have messed that up. So it was powerful.
We didn't even have any numbers yet.
No.
I mean, we were. I mean, obviously, as you said, 2 minutes after the polls closed, we're trying to scrounge to have some sort of graphic to put up to kind of talk about the race, because that's all we had at that point. It's been called, and then was it Senate first and then the governor, right? Or was it governor
Senate
first? I can't
No,
even remember.
It was Senate first and then the governor.
Within minutes.
Within minutes of each other, and it obviously put us in a little bit of a deer in the headlight.
Well, we had already talked amongst ourselves about finding some early vote numbers that we could quickly look at for some sort of barometer, and the call came out way before then. So, well, let's talk about some other things. There's some big ramifications out of all this. What's most curious to you guys in terms of what you saw on election night?
I want to know what the long-term implication is. You know, we've seen a huge wave here. As you mentioned, the supermajorities in both the House and the Senate within our state, and now couple that with the term limits bill that went through the proposal. I'm just curious what that means. You can have people serving for 16 years now.
Yeah, I don't think that the term limit stays for very long. The national term limits, people have already told me that they will be back in 2016 with the standalone measure to put term limits back in place. I think they'll be successful with that. I'd be shocked if the majority of Arkansans don't do that. But as for the long-term implications, I mean, I think the Democratic Party is devastated.
Yeah, I think that the margins here were so wide that that's not something you close in a short amount of time. I mean, if you look at the polls, most of the polling, the average on those two big races, the Senate and governor's race, were about 7 percentage points, and it winds up wider than that. But it really looks to me like if you factor in the undecided in there, that really everybody who went to the polls or got close to Election Day and didn't have a decision made broke with the Republican.
That's a great point, you know, because the Talk Business and Hendricks College polling that we did about 3 weeks before Election Day showed those 7-8 point kind of margins, particularly in the top two races there. And I've talked to some of the different parties and different campaigns, and they tell me that they saw some very similar things in that last 2 to 3 weeks, that just the margins kept getting bigger and bigger and bigger for the Republicans. So I don't think it was a terrible shock. At least it wasn't to the Republicans. It may have been for the Democrats. I think they were still clinging to hope, but it didn't happen.
So what does this mean for legislation going forward? I mean, we come up with a new governor, a supermajority in both the House and the Senate. So does that mean the private option's dead? What do we do with that?
Your job as a lead capital reporter for KATV just got a whole lot more interesting.
Practicing your question. That was the question, right?
You can bet every legislator is going to be asked that day one.
I think that the politics for the private option are dangerously scary. I mean, you've even heard from some Republican leadership that said 56 or 57 in the House might have been a better number for us. 64 in the House. There are some people that got elected exclusively on campaigning against the private option, and they are not going to budge. And look, I have said this publicly a couple of times. If you unpackage the private option, put it all back together in some fashion form of something new, and gift wrapped it again, if there is a penny coming from the Affordable Care Act, those folks are going to vote against it. So
does that make Hutchinson's job a little bit more difficult? You know, he has been very moderate in his stance of this all along.
What did he say yesterday? He talked about, or on Thursday at his press conference, he talked about holding off until late January, I think, for even so that he could weigh some decisions.
He wants to hear from some people, I'm sure. You know, and that's the thing too. Is the thing that I keep thinking about is that was partially tailored by Republicans. So there is a faction of moderate Republicans that want that to go forward, or at least maybe, and that's the question, I think.
Not
Did they
even
want it to go
partially.
forward,
I mean,
or did
very
they do it
heavily.
as a bargaining tool because they had to, and now with fewer Democrats in the House and Senate, do they have to do
Republicans
it?
want some changes to
Yeah.
it. They wanted to advance some things, I believe, but
Sure.
I think that the numbers in the House and in the Senate, I mean, there's 4 or 5 new senators
There
now
are,
that
absolutely.
that campaigned against the private option. It's going to be a tough road.
So what about Governor Beebe? What does this say about his legacy? He's on his way out.
Well, we should ask him, shouldn't we?
We
In some
should
sort of
ask
exit interview. He's obviously going to get a little bit of blame on this. Republicans are going to certainly, I think, target him as, hey, this is your legacy. But look, he leaves with immense popularity.
Yes,
He's in the high 60s with his popularity. And you're going to look back, history will be kind to Mike Beebe. I mean, he had a long, distinguished career. I don't think he could have controlled any of the tidal wave that came on Tuesday night. This was national in scope.
And remember, in 2010, there was a Republican wave in the congressional districts and in the other Senate seat with John Bozeman beating Blanche Lincoln, and Mike Beebe won very handily in 2010, and I think the approval rating says it all. I really think, and I mean, this is opinion on my part, but I think if he was still on the ballot, I mean, depending on who he was running against, he'd still have a pretty good shot
I think
at
you're
winning.
right about that. I
Yeah.
agree with that. All right, y'all want to take a little bit more of this online?
Yeah,
With
we
an
do.
extra? All right, I'm getting the wraps on here. And plus, we've got Governor-elect Asa Hutchinson coming our
Oh,
way here in
wow.
a second. So KATV Scott Inman and Janelle Lilley, we're going to do a little bit more online at talkbusiness.net after this.
A farmer understands the needs of every season, and so do Farm Bureau members. When Arkansas families needed electricity, our members brought it. Reliable roads, our members built them. Agricultural education, our members provided. Today's members may not live on a farm, but their connections are as close as ever. So when that difficult season comes, no member has to face it alone. For every season, Arkansas Farm Bureau. Join today.
And welcome back to our Web Extra. I'm with KATV's Janelle Lilley and Scott Inman, and we are still recovering from election night here. So we were talking a little bit in between on air and online here about just kind of the ramifications of what the makeup of the Arkansas legislature is now.
It's so interesting, and I've covered both of these bodies for a few cycles now, so I'm excited to get back into it in January. But I should tell you, what is really fascinating me right now is who's going to be the leadership in both of these bodies. Is it going to be the more conservatives? We saw last session a very moderate Republican leadership step forward, and so I'm just curious now, is it going to be the more conservatives that have the base and that people, I don't know, I have no idea what it looks like.
And
But
I certainly think everybody is their own legislator, but I would certainly think a Republican governor has a lot of legwork in the middle of that, behind the scenes, because he's still, don't you think he's still going to be seen as the leader of the party?
He will
as the
be.
well,
governor?
and he does have Lamoureux, who is very
that's
and a
true,
very
that's true.
experienced
Yeah.
legislator.
And well respected by both Democrats and Republicans. And even, I think there's a third group of legislators up there now besides Democrats and Republicans. There are far-right Republicans up there
Right.
too. I mean,
Yeah.
seriously, there were some Tea Party
Yeah.
Republicans that were elected that were very, very conservative in all their stances. And they are not going to go along with just
Yeah.
the Republican Party line.
There's a
But will
unity
they-
challenge. There's a unity
Yeah.
challenge in the Republican Party right now. I
Will
think.
it be enough to build a firewall on issues that they're against? That's the question that you're going to have
I
going
think
forward.
it plays out a lot like Democrats had over the years. You always had conservative or moderate Democrats and you had liberal Democrats. Not many of them, but you had some. And so
Right.
those groups always could fall in line eventually. Either the liberals gave up on their, not so moderate stances and went ahead and went with the momentum there. You didn't see it have to go too far to the left because the numbers were bigger. And I think you'll see that with the Republicans.
Well, and here's the other long-term ramification that you were talking about, Roby, that I think is very interesting, is obviously on a national level with the GOP taking over the U.S. Senate. That's always a pretty cyclical thing. I mean, that could go back the other way in a couple of years, because I think the mood of the nation swings. The mood of Arkansas does not swing as is provided by the case for how long Democrats had control. I mean, this could be a long-term moving forward situation where Democrats are going to have a hard time winning most
I think
offices.
they will. I wrote some analysis this week to that point, as a matter of fact, just talking about how, first of all, the farm clubs in the Republican Party now, I mean, that's where your young leadership is to move up into the ranks. We saw Bruce Westerman go to Congress. I mean, we've seen French Hill, who's paid dues for years in the Republican Party, get elected to Congress. Now you'll have to look at somebody like a Steve Womack as a potential Senate candidate, governor candidate after Asa Hutchinson may win 4 years or 8 years or however long. I mean, so there's a deep farm club there now that the Democrats don't have. I mean, their guys got beat this time around.
Yeah.
Maybe Nate Steele has a career down the road, but Pat Hayes isn't going to stick around for 2 or 4 or 6 more years. James Lee Witt's not going to stick around for that longer. I think Mark Pryor would have a tough time coming back unless the mood of the state changed. Mike Beebe's going to retire. I mean, Dustin McDaniel is still out there, I think, with a chance to rehabilitate his image, but the Democrats don't have a deep bench right now, and the Republicans do.
Yeah, and another thing that people may be happy about, I saw $37 million was spent on the Senate race in North Carolina. Nationwide, $4 billion.
Unbelievable.
And obviously we got our big share of it
Yeah,
in the
we
Senate
did.
race,
We got
mainly.
more than 37 million.
And the governor's
Yeah.
race. But is that going to happen the next time around?
Yeah.
With a 16-point spread in the last Senate election?
There may be some people happy to not see some television ads
That's what I'm
in
saying.
Arkansas. Yeah, I don't think Arkansas is going to be competitive
We're not in
enough
play anymore.
for federal races anytime
Right.
soon. So
And presidential probably is out of the question,
I
too.
think it is. Yeah, I mean, Arkansas is not going to be a swing state.
No.
You know, you might see a little bit of money if Mike Huckabee's on the ticket somehow.
So what do we attribute this to? Is it, do we attribute it to the ground game? Because we heard a lot about the Democratic ground game. They felt like that was going to be their saving grace for a long time. And as far as the Republican ground game, I don't know that we saw as much evidence of that in the state as we did the Democratic, but maybe, it was just missed, or maybe there was a wave nationally that we
Yeah,
changed.
the Republican ground game was there, and it was working big time, and it was not beating its chest to be recognized.
It was
is the
not.
deal.
It was not nearly
very,
as
very
vocal.
targeted. It was very, and I think they had great success with it. If you look at those returns and where they scored big numbers up in Northeast Arkansas, they won some of those counties that have been Democratic strongholds by 60% plus. I mean, that is unreal. That means that means those areas are gone for the Democrats for some foreseeable future. But
And so is that what we give the victory to, the ground game?
I think so. And this was an anti-Obama
Yes,
sentiment.
that's what I was going to say.
Yeah, go ahead.
No, and I think that, the fact that he got in the high 30s in the last presidential election here, he's very unpopular in Arkansas. I think that the Affordable Care Act and calling it Obamacare and getting it all into one little package. That's why Tom Cotton said, Mark Pryor,
5,000
93%,
times. Yeah.
President Obama, over and over again, because that it resonated, I think.
If I'm Doyle Webb and the Republican Party of Arkansas, I erect a statue of Barack Obama down there at party headquarters, or I rename the Republican Party headquarters the Barack Obama Republican Party headquarters, because he has driven 3 cycles of Republican gains in Arkansas to this very heightened majority status now. So I'm sure everybody at home will love me saying that, so particularly all my Democratic friends.
You're going to get
But
an email
it's
from
the
Doyle.
truth, though. It is the truth. I'm telling you.
It's just the
truth.
internet. Nobody watches the internet.
Yes,
right?
right. All right, Scott, Janelle, thanks. It's been great working with you guys on the
Yeah,
election cycle. We've got a lot more going now with the legislature.
We
right.
appreciate you
legislature,
being
so-
on board, too. That makes a 4-hour broadcast a lot easier on the anchor.
Especially when my race got called 2 minutes after polls
know.
closed.
Yeah.
What am I going to talk about now?
You could have been over at the Mike Ross campaign headquarters in the dark, so
That's
the
true.
lights went out.
Yes,
So.
literally,
All right.
literally and figuratively.
All right, that is all for our web extra. We appreciate you guys watching the extra discussion here. For the latest in Arkansas business and political news, check out talkbusiness.net each and every day. Thanks.